This is the Secular Bible Study. I'm the Amateur Exegete. In the last video, we began exploring solutions to the Synoptic Problem, beginning with the Augustinian hypothesis. The Augustinian hypothesis was a position put forward by Augustine of Hippo in his Harmony of the Gospels. In Volume 1 of that work, Augustine proposed that the first of the three Synoptic Gospels to have been written was Matthew's. Mark then wrote his using Matthew's as his guide, and finally, Luke utilized both Mark and Matthew to compose his own. The Augustinian hypothesis rests on the notion of Matthean priority, but it isn't the only possible solution to the Synoptic Problem that does. Nor is it the only possible solution suggested by Augustine. In the fourth volume of his Harmony, Augustine suggested that Mark was actually the third to have been written, resting upon the previous work done by Matthew and Luke. Using the early Christian imagery, whereby the four Gospels were depicted as the four beasts of the book of Revelation, Augustine writes, "And in this way, Mark, who seems to answer to the figure of the man in the well-known mystical symbol of the four living creatures, either appears to be preferentially the companion of Matthew, as he narrates a larger number of matters in unison with him than with the rest, and therein acts in due harmony with the idea of the kingly character whose wont it is, as I have stated in the first book, to be not unaccompanied by attendants, or else, in accordance with the more probable account of the matter, he holds a course in conjunction with both. For although he is at once with Matthew in the larger number of passages, he is nevertheless at one rather with Luke in some others, and this very fact shows him to stand related at once to the lion and to the steer, that is to say, to the kingly office which Matthew emphasizes, and to the sacerdotal which Luke introduces, wherein also Christ appears distinctively as man, as the figure which Mark sustains stands related to both of these. So the order in which the books were written would have been Matthew first, then Luke, and then Mark. And in this view, it seems that Mark would have utilized both Matthew's and Luke's Gospels when composing his own. This view was also one taken by the German scholar Johann Jakob Griesbach, who proposed, based upon literary data, that Mark utilized both Matthew and Luke in composing his own Gospel. Today, this view has become known as the two-gospel hypothesis, and has been defended by New Testament scholars like William Farmer and David Peabody. It rests primarily on 3 points. First, the two-gospel hypothesis rests on Matthean priority. This was the position of virtually all Christians up until the 19th century. Second, the two-gospel hypothesis rests on the idea that Luke utilized Matthew when composing his gospel. Those who affirm the hypothesis note that Luke and Matthew share a large amount of material. If Matthew was written first, then Luke must have used Matthew as a source. Finally, the two-gospel hypothesis rests on the idea that Mark used both Matthew and Luke as his sources for his gospel. Much of the two-gospel hypothesis rests on the views of early Christians and the order in which those gospels were believed to have been written. The exception, of course, is Luke, which the two-gospel hypothesis places second in order of composition, while many early Christians believed it had been written third, as in the Augustinian hypothesis. There is also internal evidence that supporters appeal to in support of the hypothesis. For example, there are places in which Matthew and Luke agree with one another, but disagree with Mark. Under another solution to the Synoptic Problem, the two-source hypothesis, these agreements are perhaps difficult to explain, since that hypothesis asserts that while Matthew and Luke drew from Mark, Luke did not draw from Matthew. But under the two-gospel hypothesis, these differences are readily explained. But what if the underlying assumption that Matthew's was the first gospel to have been written is wrong? What possible solutions to the Synoptic Problem would we have then? That is what we will begin to explore next time. This is the Amateur Exegete, signing off.